I'm going to talk with you today as a medical doctor about what I consider to be the most exciting and valuable information that any medical doctor can share with any patient at any time. So I'm excited to share this information. Now, I'm sitting in a little piece of paradise in Phuket, Thailand, where I've been for the last week the guests of the Life Co, which is an extraordinary group of people doing diet and detox and yoga and lifestyle practices. And I want to share with you what I think is the best way to complement and enhance any well-being practices or lifestyle practices that you're going to be experiencing. Now, who am I? Well, I'm a medical doctor who 30 years ago was trained in neurology and psychiatry, and I've been particularly interested over the years in enhancing people's immune function. Initially, I worked with folks with chronic degenerative illnesses like multiple sclerosis and other neurological catastrophes, and enhanced their immune system to help them redirect their biochemistry and rewire their neurological system. We had a lot of success with using fundamental principles, which included things like diet and nutrition. And my practice has always been to help get people off of medications or at least minimize their dependence on medications, because although I'm a medical doctor, my medical colleagues consider me something of a heretic or a rebel because, as most viewers understand, when you're a medical doctor, you primarily give drugs. Well, there's better options, in my opinion, than to simply give drugs. So that's been my work, helping cancer patients, what I call oncoimmunology, or the enhancement of the immune system in cancer patients, chronic degenerative illnesses like multiple sclerosis and Lou Gehrig's disease, ALS, by helping the biochemical process, but not just the biochemical process, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Also, the role of thought. So the most important concept that I want to share with you is a concept you already know. I'm just going to try and remind you of what you've known all along, which is that our thoughts create our reality. Every major religion teaches this, and yet somehow we forget. And we think, she made me angry, my boss made me afraid, my job is stressful. We have all these emotional responses to our world, and we don't understand that we're creating those. So I consider this life that we're living to be an inside-out existence, meaning I create what I'm experiencing. So the take-home message which I want you to consider is that your thoughts create your feelings, and therefore your thoughts create your suffering or your bliss. Again, nothing new. When we're stuck in a bad emotional experience, we tend to get disoriented. My cancer patients thrive when they understand what I'm reminding you of today. So let me give this a little perspective. When I arrived in Thailand a week ago, what did I look for? I looked for the information booth, where some nice person would tell me how to change money, how to get a taxi cab, how to say hello and thank you. And every country at the airports have these information booths. But when you and I were born, we didn't have an information booth that said, hey, welcome to Earth. You're a spiritual being having an earthly existence, but while you're visiting this Earth, you should know a few things. And here's what that user's manual to life on Earth for human beings should say. It should say, number one, out there is existence, and things exist, and you exist, but you only perceive them because of your sensory system. So we get perceptions, and right now you and I are getting probably 1,000 or maybe 10,000 perceptions at this moment. We're feeling the chair, we're feeling the breeze, we're feeling temperature, we're hearing things. All those perceptions come to us. It's as if we're in a big river of consciousness. We call it the stream of consciousness. And there's billions of molecules of water going past us. And we can pay attention to what we want from those perceptions. So I hope you're listening to me, and I'm listening with my heart to what you might be thinking. And so we pay attention to certain perceptions, and that becomes something which is part of our immediate reality. There's an infinite amount of things out there, but we perceive, and that becomes what we consider in existence. Now, here's where people get confused, and this is a really exciting thing to remind people about. Once we have a perception, most of us then experience an emotion. Something happens, we see it, and the next thing we're really aware of is an emotional response. Run away, run towards, be afraid, be excited. And what I want to remind people about is that between the perception and the emotional response to the perception is always a thought. We conceive what we perceive, and then we have an experience which is positive or negative or neutral. And what's exciting is that we have typically a habitual thought about a perception, and yet we're not limited to that. We can have any number of thoughts given a perception. For example, if I kick you in the shin right now, we've known each other for a little while, and it hurts you, you could perceive the pain and you could feel anger, fear, any negative response from being attacked. But before you felt the negative feeling, you had a thought, which was that I mean you harm. And so you must be attentive and be careful and retreat. But see, you could have the thought, knowing me, Dr. Weeks must be confused. How can I help him not hurt other people? And you wouldn't even really feel the pain so much in your shin because you'd be thinking, my friend Dr. Weeks is confused. He would never kick me in the shins to do me harm. Or you could be curious. Is this a game? And all of a sudden you're thinking about other possibilities, and so your feeling is not one of being attacked, it's one of being challenged or engaged. Another way to think about that is many of my patients would come to me and say they have stress. My life is too stressful. I have too much anxiety. I'm scared of what's going to happen. And what I try to help them understand is quite simply, there's really no such thing as stress. All there is adrenaline. We have a feeling of something's making us aroused. And how we respond to that adrenaline is determined by our thought. All feelings derive from thought. Every thought creates a feeling. And when we bear that in mind and develop that as our own understanding or as our own insight, it's an example like this which can be helpful. When my youngest daughter graduated from high school, she said, I want to jump out of an airplane with you. She was of a legal age to do so. You can't do that in America before you're 17. She'd wanted to do it earlier, but I said no. And so we agreed to jump out of an airplane. Now, what was involved in that agreement? Well, we agreed to have a parachute, which would work. So imagine two people jumping out of an airplane, one with a parachute that works, one with no parachute. They both have the identical experience of adrenaline. When I jumped out of that airplane and looked at the earth rushing towards me as I'm free falling, I had tremendous adrenaline. But my thought was, I have a good parachute and I know what I'm doing. And I will land safely and this will be a great memory. And so all that adrenaline became a fabulous experience and a wonderful memory. But if I jump out of the airplane with no parachute, my thought would be, this is going to kill me. And from the same adrenaline, I would probably die before I hit the ground. Similar experience, but we spin it differently. The thought is, over here with the parachute, this is fun. Without the parachute, this is lethal. When people come to me with serious illnesses, life-threatening illnesses, I take the time to remind them of what they already know, which is that their thoughts will become the most important intervention in their healing. Not something just on the side, but really the most important piece. For example, if someone comes with a knife in his back, or let's say he's attacked and he has a knife in his back and he's in the alley of the street, and he has the thought, this is horrible. I'm going to die from this. No one's going to hear me. There's no hope. I would suggest his entire immune system, his life support system starts to shut down because it's been given the instruction there's no hope. So it begins the process of recycling. Now, the same situation can happen to this person with a knife in his back, and he can say, that's terribly painful. I'm terribly afraid, but I know I will survive because someone will find me, and I know they'll take me to a good hospital, and the good doctors will save my life. And just that different thought, given the same experience, makes the most important difference. You still have to get the knife out of the back. I'm not saying it's all thought. I'm saying that in any illness, you know, in English we have these two words, illness and disease. But of course, illness is one thing. It's the diagnosis, really. But the disease is the degree of dis-ease you have given the situation. So the first gentleman had tremendous disease with the knife in his back, and the second had very little disease, but still the same amount of pain. So the second person had less suffering. And that's another truth, is that suffering is under our control. Pain may not be, but our spin on it, this pain will pass, then I'll be healthy, versus this pain will be the death of me. Our spin on it, our thought process, creates an entirely different experience. So, anyone listening to this lecture needs to understand that I'm not teaching you anything new. I'm just sharing with you what you already know, and which, if you hear these words not as an intellectual lecture, but as an invitation to try out your own ability to think and to try out the role of thinking in your life, you'll find that the natural state of the human being is one of enlightenment and one of buoyancy and levity. I have patients who they have the diagnosis of depression, and they're very tired often. I say to them, of course you're tired. It takes tremendous energy to be depressed. The natural state is to be optimistic and carefree. It's our thoughts which make us stressed or depressed. And it's a habitual, chronic thought which leads people to the experience of depression. Now, any of the doctors looking at this might say, no, 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 depression is a chemical imbalance. It's a deficiency of serotonin. And psychosis and schizophrenia, that's an imbalance in the dopamine receptors. And panic attacks are from too much adrenaline. And the answer is not entirely. Those contribute, but they only manifest as the disease if we think along the lines which are consistent with depression. So I disagree with my doctor colleagues. This is why I'm a medical heretic. I say the best way to treat depression is not with chemicals. It's with lifestyle interventions, diet, nutrition, exercise in particular, but also with helping people understand that they can't afford the luxury or the indulgence of a negative thought. I had one depressed patient who kept saying, "My mother is at fault." He was about 60 years old and he kept saying, "My mother did this." And I said, "Well, tell me about this." "Yes, but my mother did that." And he says, "If it weren't for my mother doing this." And he's 60 years old. And I said to him, "I have met the Buddha." And he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "You are the Buddha." And he says, "What do you mean?" And I said, "The Buddha is somebody who can hold one thought in his mind despite all distractions. And no matter what happens in your life, you blame your mother. You are like the Buddha. You hold one habitual thought so strongly that you can't live in the moment." So helping him dismiss that thought is the most significant intervention in his depression, and he no longer needs medications. That's just one example of how thinking can make a situation worse or make it better, because our feelings, which is the only realm in which we suffer, are created by our thoughts. I mentioned earlier that many of us think, "She causes me sadness," or "My marriage is too stressful." She's out there. The marriage is out there. How we experience it is entirely dependent upon our thoughts. Now, about that life manual, when you're coming to Earth, it would teach us that there are things out there which exist, but we only can really experience them through our perceptions, and the spin we put on it is related to our thinking. In the same way, I think to myself, if I weren't going to fly home from Thailand, if I were going to take a boat because I love to sail, I would need 3 things to sail home. I'd need a boat, which is seaworthy. I'd also need a compass or a chart so I could navigate. And then I'd need some weather. Now, I would want to have not just all storms and all lightning, but maybe some easy days, but I like the variety, and that's the realm of the emotions. Like the weather, our emotions change because our thinking changes. Now, no matter which way the wind blows, no matter how we feel, you still stay true to a chart, a course that you've charted. The rudder and the compass and the map are like our thinking. And our thinking can master the situation so we're not bothered by the weather so much. And lastly, we need a seaworthy boat, our body. So in the same sense as a sailor needs these 3 things, the boat, the compass chart, and the weather, we as human beings, we need our human body, and we need our thinking to make sense of and to create our reality. Cancer patients have a particular challenge, and the cancer patients have a challenge because they are terribly influenced in their thinking. The first thing that happens is that the culture is terrified of cancer. We're all taught as children that it's not how whether you win or lose, it's how you play the game. It's not quantity of life, it's quality. And yet we're taught by the pharmaceutical industries to be afraid. You need this drug, you need this intervention. And when someone gets cancer, which we call the big C, the ultimate C, a life-threatening disease, when they get cancer, the first thing they're told by a man in white or a woman in white, like a priest, they pronounce like voodoo medicine. They say, "You have 6 months to live." And I consider that to be criminal. I consider that to be assault with a deadly weapon, because the patient might have some hope and some optimism, and that oncologist has no business crushing that hope. and saying, don't pay attention to nutrition, it's irrelevant. Don't worry about vitamins and yoga, and don't think about meditation. You just need chemotherapy and radiation. Now that doctor only knows what he or she is trained to know, and so I forgive them for doing the best they can with a very limited perspective, chemo or radiation or both, or surgery. But the doctor needs to understand that the human being will thrive or not depending upon their thoughts. So instead of saying you have 6 months to live, the doctor could say, you have a diagnosis. And in many instances, people live no more than 6 months. But I don't know who you are in your being. I don't know your resources. I don't know whether you're loved or whether you're at peace with the world. I don't know how you can affect your immune system, so I'm simply going to offer you my best advice. But this is a journey that you must take, and you must consult your inner wisdom, and you must consider how you want to think about this challenge. And you and I know that in any given illness, it's maybe 9 out of 10 patients who die of this cancer. Well, what about the 10th patient? Why did that person not die? That's who we should be studying, and in my experience, when 9 out of 10 patients die of a cancer, the one who didn't die had healthy thinking. That person had a purpose in life, felt enthusiastic about life, had meaning, and knew that living or dying wasn't the most important thing. It was how they lived and died. So that person was not afraid. That person was at peace because that person's thinking was elegant, and they understood that as you think, so you create your reality. So whether it's your career, where you're upset with your boss, or you're frustrated in your job, you can choose to think about that in an unproductive way, which will just exacerbate the problem, or you can be curious. You can say, I wonder how I can approach this differently. I like to remind people that life can be very much like a movie, which means when we go to a movie, we understand it's just a movie. And if there's some violence or some scary scenes, most of us, when the movie ends, we have still a little tingling and some anxiety, some excitement, some adrenaline. But as we go home, we realize that was the movie. This is our life. I would like people who are watching this tape to understand they can be the directors of their own life, as if they were the movie director, and they can observe themselves, and they can say, at this part of the life, at this part of the movie scene, typically I would do this. I would throw a tantrum. I would be angry. I would throw a fit. I would complain. I would sulk. But as the director of my life, of my movie, I'm going to instead choose a different thought. The way when I kick you in the shin, you think, I wonder why Brad did that, rather than I'm being attacked, I must defend myself. So as the director of your own life, here's the challenge. Here's the challenge for anyone who's watching this. Because this has to be your own insight. It can't be something you just listen to. It has to be something you try out in your life. And the challenge is, the next time you have a negative thought and you feel yourself in a funk, put on your detective hat and say, what was the thought? Now, most of the time, 99 times out of 100, it'll be a habitual thought. But you, as the director of your life, can say, you know, I thought this, and that's why I've been in the funk for the last 20 minutes. That's why I've been depressed and feeling down, and feeling that life is difficult. Because my thought was not a functional thought. It wasn't good for me. Shame on me for thinking that thought. I mean, there's much better thoughts. And at that point, when you put on your detective hat and you find the thought that created the negative feeling, now you have an option to replay that part of the movie and say, what's a new thought I can have? and you'll come up with a new thought. In fact, that's the wonderful thing about human beings as thinking beings. We're in this river of consciousness and we'll never run out of thoughts. We can simply dismiss the first 10 habitual negative ones and we can enjoy this new thought. And lo and behold, this new thought creates a new reality. Many people wonder whether this is like cognitive therapy or behavioral therapy, and it's really different. Behavioral therapy or cognitive therapy help us manage the unfortunate emotions and try to train them differently. It's an intervention after the fact. This is really more insight-based. As long as you understand that you are by nature a thinking being, and that before any feeling arises from an experience, it's a necessity that you as a thinking being intercede and spin it negatively or spin it positively. Then once you understand that, anytime you find yourself in a bad feeling, where we all find ourselves, I find myself there frequently, but I can take the power out of that negative emotion because I know it's just illusory. It's just the consequence of an untrained or not elegant thought. So this is something which we're all made from. We're all thinking beings. And I wish that everyone in school is taught that they're thinkers. And in kindergarten, you're taught this user's manual of life, that there are things that exist, but you have no relation to them unless you think about them. And we'll never stop thinking, and our thinking will constantly create our reality. This is a wonderful exercise to practice. Remember or reach for something which is a negative feeling, or something which makes you afraid, or some challenge that you can't master. And try to understand, like the director of the film of your life, what are the thoughts that got you to that negative outcome. Usually they're habitual, which is kind of too bad because we never had the chance really to be conscious. It was just a habitual thought. But then wait and create a new thought. Dismiss all the negative thoughts. The best example for how to dismiss a thought is this. If you and I were on a camping trip, someplace where the rivers were clean, and I asked you to go down to the river and get a bucket of water because we're going to make tea and I'm going to start the fire. And you go down to the river and you're just about to dip your bucket in the water when what do you see? You see a bunch of cow poop floating down the river. So here's your challenge. You're supposed to go down to the river and get some water, but it's polluted with cow poop. Well, what do? Well, you probably wait a minute. You look upstream, the cows are finishing their business, they're leaving, and you know in a minute or two you'll get clean water coming past you, and that's what you dip your bucket into. Why in the world would you dip your bucket into water full of cow poop? And yet if we think of that river as our stream of consciousness, we often go to that stream of consciousness and take terribly polluted thoughts and put them in our mind. And it's up to us to simply say, nope, not that thought. You don't have to come up with a clever, better thought. That's the magic. The thoughts will kind of come. If you just dismiss the thoughts you don't want, you trade up. And then you dismiss other thoughts and you trade up. And your state of mind, your inner peace is amplified because you're being selective about what thoughts you think. You're being selective about what you pay attention to. Now, all professional athletes understand this. If I were a professional basketball player and I wanted to shoot a professional foul throw so that we would win the game and the game was on the line, and I had the thought, I'm going to miss this shot. All athletes are trained to move away from the line, bounce the ball a bit to clear your mind, visualize a successful foul throw, and only shoot the throw when your mind is clear and your thinking is that you're going to make the shot. It would be ludicrous to shoot the ball when you think you're going to miss the shot. And in the same sense, every aspect of our life is created by our thinking. And some of our thinking is, I'm going to miss the shot. Why would we tolerate that? Why would we indulge ourselves in a negative thought? So, if people watching this video have an illness or a challenge, certainly create meaningful strategies. If you have cancer, pay attention to diet. Pay attention to raw vegan and to organic. Pay attention to oxygenating your body through yoga and exercise, meditation and prayer. But if that's all you do, and you allow your thoughts to work against you, then it's really for naught. Even as a medical doctor, trained in the disposition of medications, I would say that the most important remedy I can give someone is to remind them that they're thinking beings, and everything that they experience is under their control. They can spin it positive or they can spin it negatively. So to summarize, we all face challenges. And if we're not aware that by nature our thoughts create our feelings, then we're just being buffeted about in a storm, and we're full of blame and fear and a sense of failure. I want to remind you that our native state of mind is that of well-being. It's that of optimism and buoyancy. And it takes a lot of effort, a lot of bad thinking, a lot of bad habitual thinking to be diseased. So my wish for everyone watching this is to become the director of their own film and notice when they're going off the track of health and well-being, identify the dysfunctional thought, and see about replacing it with something which gives them more happiness.